I call to order this hearing on case number G2024-01-BC involving book title, My Maddy, written by Gayle E. Pitman, illustrated by Viola Tobacco. My name is Dr. Bessie G. Jackson. I'm the hearing agent for this case. Pursuant to Chapter 1006, Section 28 Florida Statutes, and other applicable law, each party will have an adequate and fair opportunity to be heard and to present evidence. I will listen to all of the evidence presented by both sides of this case, and I will prepare a recommended order that will be submitted to the school board. At this hearing, both parties will have 1 hour to present their case, which includes the opening statement, presenting of evidence, questioning witnesses, and the closing statement. If a party does not use all of their time, the unused time will not be given to the other party to extend their allotted time. With the exception of evidence that is irrelevant, not applicable or pertinent, immaterial, which adds nothing to the subject at hand, and unduly repetitious, repeated many times, will be accepted in these conduct of affairs. Any part of this evidence may be presented to me in written form. All testimony shall be made under oath. Hearsay evidence may only be used for the purpose of supplanting, or explaining other evidence. I would like to add, when presenting your displayed evidence at the podium, at the start of your presentation, with the printed documents that have been submitted to me, I would like for you to reference those before you begin your presentation. Reference them with the exhibit number, slide title, or page number of that particular evidence located in the submitted materials to the hearing officer. In order to avoid delay in having to flip back and forth between exhibits, since listening to evidence being presented is a linear process, I cannot jump around and hear the presentation when trying to locate the information being presented. It is cumbersome trying to locate printed submitted hard copy while at the same time process the information being presented. For convenience, state the material location in your submitted packet or notebook before you begin your presentation and the respondents at the podium. At this time, will each party to this case and their witnesses please come to the mic and state your name for the record, after which please remain standing after you have done so for the swearing in. All witnesses please to the mic.
Madam Hearing Officer, do you have a printed copy of what you just read? It sounds different from Dr. Marule listening to me. The procedure has changed. So do you have a copy of what you just read?
The procedure has been changed since January 1. Am I correct?
The guidelines you just presented were never shared with me, that you had referred to the evidence, the page number, order. That was never written and provided.
That is only a procedure for me. I cannot follow you and hear what you're saying and flip through this big notebook that you have presented. That was for me, a hearing officer.
Ms. Jackson, thank
As a
you.
procedure.
I understand, and I appreciate. It would have been beneficial to have that in advance to prepare those slides with those procedures. And if
That
not,
was an
have some grace
understanding
for
at the
next time.
beginning that all material that you present to me in the notebook is what you must present at the hearing. But I'm having a problem following it.
These are all great points,
Okay.
and I appreciate it, and I appreciate the clarification. My point is simply that those guidelines that you just went over, which I think are reasonable, weren't shared in advance, so the presentation wasn't set up per se stating each exhibit item in the order that you're asking.
Dr. Monroe, I'm trying to understand, what is this you presented to me in this notebook if it's not your presentation that you're going to make at the podium?
That's what I submitted. There's the evidence that supports my presentation, as it's been in the past 3 hearings.
I know, and that's what's confusing me, because my understanding is what you present and give to me for review is also what you're going to present at the podium. The deviation for what you give me and that live at the podium cannot be adhered to as for a decision that I'm going to make based on your presentation.
But I'm offering my argument based on those evidence.
Okay.
Hearing officer, would you then recess, give us the evidence, we'll put the evidence in the order of the presentation, so it won't confuse you. We didn't know to do this in advance, as this is changing the rules again in the middle of the game. It's happened again and again and again. So please respect.
Excuse me, sir, this is not changing the rule. This is just a procedure that has always been stated, that you must give me the information that you're going to present. Excuse me, Attorney Respondent.
May I be heard? This is not a procedure that the district has changed. This is a procedure that will simplify for her. We have not made the change. She's asking that we be clear about what evidence we're talking about. Excuse me, sir. I would prefer that you not interrupt me when I'm talking. I think that would be appropriate. I have no objection to doing it this way, Dr. Jackson. I don't know that I'll be specifically referring to a piece of evidence, but if I do, I will make sure I do that.
The same grace I'm asking is we didn't know those specific stipulations that you're asking for in the presentation. I would be happy to try to make those references as I go, but since I didn't know it in advance, I might not have it set up exactly how you're asking.
All right, Dr. Miller, what we're going to do for this one? Okay, I'm going to try to follow you within that hour. We're still going to stay in that hour frame, but forthcoming, please follow that procedure.
I appreciate that, and if you could give us those procedures in written form, it would help so that we
I
know
will
exactly what
submit
you're asking.
that procedure to you.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'm willing to take 10 minutes and accommodate you right now.
No, we have delayed because of technology. We have witnesses that must report to other places at a certain time. So we're
Well,
moving
since we're
forward.
talking about procedures and policies, perhaps this is the right time to ask a clarification on policy 2055. I would like a clarification on policy 2522, as there seems to be currently a violation of that policy. Which
Where is that
stipulates-
located? I'm not familiar with numbers and policies. That school board policy you're
School
speaking
board
of?
policy guiding these hearing procedures.
I'm not familiar with that, so.
It's in the evidence that was submitted by Ms. Siegel.
Ms. Seeger?
It is school board policy. I know what this issue is. She's complaining about that we are violating policy 2522 of the school district policies, and she wants to make an argument of why she thinks we're violating. And I do have a response.
Dr. Murrow, that's school board. I'm a hearing officer. I cannot address school board policy.
But they're the policies that govern this hearing.
Right, but I cannot address what they have already decided at the board. That's not my role.
Oh, I
You're
know.
gonna have to
Ma'am,
take that to the
ma'am,
school. You're gonna have to take that with the school board.
Ma'am, I agree. But in the policy, it states the superintendent shall make board employees available if called as a witness and as courtesy to either party. Therefore, no subpoenas will be required for a board employee if requested by either party.
Dr.
Now, I
Muro?
requested a witness, and I was only
Excuse me,
informed
excuse
yesterday
me,
that they won't be
excuse me, Dr.
provided.
Murrow, excuse me. That's school board policy. I have no domain over that.
But it
Let's
doesn't-
move forward with the hearing.
But it's supposed to enable me to call witnesses, and the witness I called has not been proffered according to the policy that governs this hearing.
Dr. Murrow, this is argumentative. I have stated I will not address it, and it cannot come before this hearing. That's school board. Now, let's please move forward with the
But
hearing.
it's the policy that governs this interaction right now.
That witness should be there to be sworn in, ma'am.
I called a witness.
That's why we're here at the podium for swearing in. Now, I'm not going to address policy, not only the procedure I've stated, and I have relinquished, and I said that I would begin that next hearing.
Okay, but Ms. Jackson, I don't know if you understand. I called a witness as a school board employee.
That is not my domain. Please address the school board. All right, now let's get with the hearing.
I
Let's
would like
swear
to
it
be
in.
sworn in as a witness, do then.
All right, have you stated your name, Ms. Dr. Murrow?
Crystal Marule.
Thank you. Next witness, please.
Kevin Berry.
Thank you.
John Rame.
Patty Duval.
All right, so we have four witnesses. Okay, would you please raise your right hand for swearing in? Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? That's not part of my swearing in. Thank you. You may be seated. All right, Dr. Murrow, this begins your 1 hour timekeeper. Your opening statement, please.
Okay. So, my objection to the book My Maddy by Gayle Pitman is fairly simple. On page 1 it states, quote, "Most mommies are girls, most daddies are boys, but lots of parents are neither a boy nor a girl, like my Maddy." My objection is threefold. First, Florida statutes were changed in the last 2 years to establish policies concerning sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender-specific pronouns to be used in our public schools. Those policies say, A person's sex is an immutable, unchangeable biological characteristic. B, sex means the classification of a person as either male or female. C, human reproductive roles are binary, stable, and unchangeable. And D, it is false to use pronouns different from what agrees with a person's biological sex. What I have quoted from My Maddy obviously violates 3 of these policies, which means this book is highly questionable within the context of public school instruction of aligned curriculum. Though some will argue it can still be in a media center's collection, which is not instruction or instructional materials. And that argument leads to my second objection. Neither a teacher, a media specialist, or a third party can legally direct a child to this book, even if the child might ask, "Is my mommy really a boy?" This would be adult-directed conduct that would constitute instructing the child concerning gender identity, telling the child where to find the answer. Further, if a teacher or a media specialist was asked about the book, the adult would have to say, quote, "I cannot discuss this with you." When the child responds, "Why don't you know?" the adult would be obligated under Florida law to evade the topic. Does that make sense? Third, this book would only be self-selected by a child who most likely does not have a clear understanding of his or her own sex and certainly no understanding of human binary reproduction by parents. Very simply, it is not age appropriate. Therefore, it makes no sense to be curating the book in the elementary school library. 2 undeniable constraints govern the selection of school library materials. 1, physical space, and 2, budget allocations. For every book selected, there are hundreds of books that are excluded. There are 2 options to respond to these physical and financial realities. 1, you can perform a random cross-sectional selection, guaranteeing that every book of every genre has an equal probability to be selected, giving no prioritization to any specific text. Or 2, you can create selection criteria that prioritizes certain characteristics. The first option is absurd. It would lead to a random collection and therefore leaves us with only the second option. To determine what appropriate selection criteria should be, one should first consider the purpose of a school library collection. May I suggest our Florida Deputy Solicitor General, David M. Costello, clearly expressed this purpose in the case of Parnell versus Lake City School District, which I will paraphrase below concerning the purpose of our school library collection. The purpose of a school library is to curate appropriate reading material for students to further the government's educational mission. Thus, the selection criteria established must aim to support that endeavor by providing materials that properly supplement the basic readings assigned through the standard curriculum. In Florida, it is the legislature's job to say what the law is, not the local school board. School boards, in fact, are prohibited from promulgating rules at variance with the legislation's plain meaning. The government can freely select the views that it wants to express, including choosing not to speak and speaking through the removal of speech that the government disapproves. That is no less true when the government exercises editorial discretion in the selection and presentation of library books. There, too, the government engages in speech activity and is thus free of judicial scrutiny in the choices it makes. By compiling and presenting material through a government-sponsored medium, the government communicates its message. And because the government has the right to regulate the content of its own message, individuals have no right to compel the government to include their preferred content in the government's chosen compilation, be it a flag in a government parade, a candidate in a broadcasted debate, a speaker at a university commencement, or art in a state-sponsored gallery. Like those other compilations, The materials made available in a government-operated library are neither a traditional nor a designated public forum in which individuals have cognizable First Amendment interest. Thus, the First Amendment is not a sword activists may use to compel the government to speak for them. That principle applies with even more force in a public school library. By curating a school library, the government conveys its view on which books have the requisite and appropriate quality to bolster student development. Allowing private parties to add preferred books to the school library would hijack the government's message. Beyond that, absurd results would follow if the First Amendment gave activists a right of access to school children through the medium of their school's library. Forcing the government to speak in a school library for what it does not believe on pain of lawsuit would put policy decisions about what to teach in schools in the hands of litigants rather than elected representatives. In plain language, you as a hearing officer or the superintendent or his attorney or the district media specialist or members of the school board do not get to set the criteria for choosing what books are appropriate for the school library. And neither do the activists from Florida Freedom to Read or their cronies in the American Library Association. Our district staff and school media specialists have no First Amendment right to have the gender philosophy they insist upon, and they have no First Amendment right to hijack the government's message in library books. What they do have is the duty to fully and faithfully comply with state laws, standards, and rules, regardless whether they align with their personal preferences or not. And the government has spoken clearly when it stated, "It shall be the policy of every public K-12 educational institution that is provided or authorized by the Constitution and laws of Florida that a person's sex is an immutable biological trait and that it is false to ascribe to a person a pronoun that does not correspond to such person's sex." That's Florida Statute 1000.071, parentheses 1. Furthermore, each district school board is mandated to establish procedures for developing library media center collections applying this policy. As set forth in the statute 1006.28 paren 2 paren A, these procedures should be guided by reader interest, support of state academic standards, aligned curriculum, and the academic needs of students and faculty. If we are to have a social and legal order within this constitutional republic founded to protect our God-given rights, plus those rights created by positive law, we all must live under the laws established by our representatives. If we disagree with them, we need to elect new representatives. Until that is the reality, this school district must abide by those laws and remove the books that present concepts and ideologies contrary to clearly adopted policies. And I would suggest that in asserting your apparent unwillingness to apply the law, you are, in fact, undermining the protection of all of our rights. I am here today, as I've been here in the past 3 hearings, to expose this ideological activism and to hold you responsible to the rule of law. It's precisely those who believe that they're above the law that pose the most significant threat to the protection that the democratic law is intended to give us all. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Dr. Jackson and folks. Much of what Dr. Marul talks about was recently addressed and actually disagreed with by the state of Florida. There was a lawsuit brought by Equity Florida, Family Equity, and numerous parents on behalf of their children who were students in the public schools of Florida against the State Board of Education and the Florida Board. That lawsuit was settled. The issue in the lawsuit was the constitutionality of the Florida statute that limits classroom instruction on sexual orientation or gender identity in grades K through 3 or in a matter that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate. The parties settled the suit and entered into a settlement agreement that they all agreed would be sent to all school districts in Florida and to be disseminated to all principals. The state boards also agreed that the following statements I'm going to say to you were to be determined to be the positions of Florida regarding the scope and meaning of the statute. Thus, the government of Florida has spoken clearly with the following statements. The statute only restricts instruction that occurs in a classroom setting, and it's instruction on sexual orientation or gender identity in a classroom setting. The statute limits teaching and overview of modern gender theory. It also prohibits teaching a particular view of marriage equality, whether for or against. The statute does not limit mere discussion of sexual orientation or gender identity in a classroom. Typical class participation in schoolwork are not instruction, so if a youngster writes a paper on his own or her own sexual orientation or gender identity, that is appropriate. The statute would also leave teachers free to respond to students discussing their identities or family lives, to provide grades and feedback if a child chose LGBTQ identity as an essay topic, or answer questions about their families, like why does a picture on your desk have 2 mommies or 2 daddies? The references to numbers in a history book do not constitute instruction on mathematics, nor does a math problem asking students to add bushels of apples become instruction on apple farming. References in literature to a gay or transgender person or to a same-sex couple without more are not instruction on these topics. The statute does not prohibit instruction against bullying people with 1 mom or 2 moms, or the mere reference to moms or dads or any combination thereof. Instruction on the normalcy of opposite sex attraction is equally instruction on sexual orientation and therefore not allowed. It would violate the statute to instruct students that heterosexuality is superior or that gender identity is immutable based on biological traits. These are the words of the state of Florida. Most importantly to what we're here on today, the state of Florida says library books without more are not classroom instruction and are not covered by the statute. These are the official positions of the state of Florida, regardless of what Dr. Marule states to the contrary. The book, My Maddy, is a book for elementary children on gender identity. The book tells what it's about. The cover of the back says, some of the best things in the world are not one thing or the other, but entirely their own. The first statements in the book, the first page, is the only page where it makes any comment to suggest that the book is about gender. And that is, most mommies are girls, most daddies are boys, but lots of parents are neither a girl or a boy, like my Maddy. Then it goes on to describe a lot of things in nature that have more than one aspect. Hazel eyes sometimes look green and sometimes look brown. Some people have hair with a lot of blonde in it, some with a lot of brown. Sunrise is beautiful. It is not night, it is not day. A rainbow? It is between a rainy day and a sunny day. Some of the best things in the world are not one thing or the other, but are entirely fantastical on their own. This is what this book is about. It is not used in classroom instruction. It is not instructing on gender. Library books, by their very nature, are optional rather than required reading. And any library book that encourages a child to read voluntarily is beneficial to that child. Crystal Marule is asking you to ignore what the state of Florida recently has said is the proper way to reach the statute that is commonly called the Don't Say Gay bill. And to go with what she said because she took a training course to become certified K-12 as a media specialist. But based on the settlement agreement, the slides are not what should be relied on, the slides that Dr. Marule has used in the past and apparently would do so here. The statements I listed earlier are the position of the state of Florida. These statements supersede anything in the training slides created last year, and the arguments all fall by the wayside. It is the recommendation of the district that this book be retained on the shelves of the elementary school. Thank you.
Excuse me, please. No responses. At this time, we will open for our witnesses. Dr. Marul.
Okay, so I just want to quickly respond to the settlement specifically. Ms. Siegel did not read the footnote, which states that the governance and selection of library books is completely under the criteria of statute 1006.28. That is the statute under which I'm making my objection and my challenge.
Dr. Marul, your first witness, please.
I'm sorry?
Your first witness?
It's me.
Okay.
Okay. So here's my declaration for my presentation. I am a professional and an educational specialist with 2 master's degrees and a PhD in language, and I have teaching certificates from 3 states, including Florida, and I am certified as a Florida School Media Specialist. I have studied child development, and I'm familiar with how reading proficiency develops in children to the point they can understand abstract concepts outside of their own experiences. I am also a married parent of 3 who has done some homeschooling, but all 3 children have been in your schools. Thus, my comments in this presentation are from the perspective of both a parent and an expert witness and may contain professional opinions. My presentation today is based on the science behind these realities that I know from my training and experience to be true. 1, humans are both relational and rational beings. Relationships produce the greatest happiness and the deepest sorrows, and humans strive to understand the world around them in a rational and coherent fashion. 2, humans use words. Humans perceive the reality around them and organize their perceptions into conceptual knowledge using words to describe or relate those perceptions to themselves and others. 3, reality is truth. What is truth. Reality does not conform to what I think or feel. The earth is round, whether we believe it or not. I am 44 years old, whether I feel it or not. Truth is exclusive. Truth negates any contradictory statement under the same conditions. I cannot be a biological female and not be a biological female or non-binary at the same time. Truth is revealed, it is not created. As in the STEM fields, we discover the mathematical principles that unite them all. These principles are reality revealed, not created. They are truth. 6, male and female forms. Every human ever born had 2 parents whose sex was binary, not arbitrary. One is male and the other female. In humans, we call these forms boys or men and girls and women. As the developmental biologist, Dr. Emma Hilton, and evolutionary biologist, Dr. Colin Wright noted, the evolutionary function of these 2 anatomies is to aid in reproduction via the fusion of sperm and ova. No 3rd type of sex cell exists in humans, and therefore there is no sex spectrum or additional sexes beyond male and female. Sex is binary. 7, male and female differences. Human physiology reveals large differences between male and female humans, not only in their biology, but also their neurology and psychology. Obvious differences between males and females result from variations of chromosomes, gene expression, gonadal tissue, hormone production, genital morphology, height, weight, voice pitch, muscle mass, bone density, and more. But regardless of these variation in traits, the reality remains. Sex is defined by the types of gamete one's anatomy is organized to produce. 2 gametes, 2 types of sexes. Even Richard Dawkins chimed in on this just this past week, and he said, we showed that there are only 2 sexes, no intermediaries. 8, human reproduction. The highly developed intellectual and relational abilities of humans has resulted for millennia in the union of humans called marriage and the centerpiece for reproducing the next generation in units we call family, the only indispensable institution of human society. Truth and fantasy. We educate our children to distinguish between truth and fantasy, reality and delusion. We know from research in mental health that delusional people often end up in trouble with the law, hurting themselves and hurting others. We spend billions each year on therapies and medications to help them live in reality. 10, human flourishing. All the sociological research shows the most successful children, the most psychologically balanced, rational, relational, and productive humans come from two-parent homes where a father and mother model male and female behavior. That is not to say that children from a single parent or single-sex home cannot do well in their adult lives. Neither does it say that everyone from a two-parent home will be healthy and productive either. We are talking about statistical probabilities. Parents are binary. The primary definition of parent is the one that begets or brings forth offspring. If you are a parent, you're either the mother, you provided the ovum, the large gamete, or you are the father, you provided the sperm, the small gamete. Now, while socially the term mother or father can be used as someone who plays the role of the biological mother or father to care for the upbringing of their offspring, the term hinges on the fact that there is factually a primary definition. Conflation of biological roles and social roles. When women and girls are told that they are actually men or boys because they prefer masculine activities or clothes, and when men and boys are told that they're actually women or girls because they prefer feminine activities or clothes, such a practice is not progressive, but regressive. It defines the sex of the individual by using gender stereotypes of how men and women should act and behave, but often results in biological interventions made to their bodies with devastating consequences. The truth is, each of us has a mix of masculine and feminine traits, but this diversity does not transform us into the opposite sex. Dads with feminine characteristics are still dads, and moms with masculine characteristics are still moms. The irony is, if you're a mom who likes stereotypical maternal activities, your interests are viewed as a product of socialization. But if you are a mom who likes some stereotypical male activities, then suddenly you might be a dad trapped in a mom's body. As long as our society keeps conflating sex and gender, and as long as we believe men and women who do not conform to societal gender stereotypes are no longer men or women, or are actually the opposite sex, then the liberty we desire from the constraints of gender roles will never be reached. Pedagogical research and common sense dictate we always teach the rule before the exception. To conflate these issues in a children's book is a reckless abandonment of the educational mission to teach children that which is true, reality. Our state's educational mission is to provide all students with the opportunity to expand their knowledge and skills through learning opportunities and research valued by students, parents, and communities, to produce emotionally stable, responsible, and productive individuals who prioritize others and avoid harmful behaviors. These behaviors lead to greater burdens on our criminal justice, our healthcare systems, as well as our civil family courts. Ultimately, our children will suffer as innocent victims if we fail in this mission. In recent years, the Florida legislature has changed the standards for public school curriculum materials and the books that may be maintained in classrooms and media centers to complement student instruction. The legislature has set the ground rules for interpreting all statutory guidelines and the rules adopted by Florida Department of Education related instructional materials and library collections. From my experience, Alachua County has substantially chosen to ignore these ground rules, and that in part is why we're here today. Education ground rules. Sex is defined as binary, biological males and females, and is not changeable. Pronouns used by school personnel must agree with child's biological sex, and topics of sexual orientation and gender identity cannot be part of school instruction K to 8, even by third parties. Here are the actual statutory numbers that I just summarized. These ground rules protect students from age-inappropriate exposure to theories of sexual orientation and gender identity. The primary, the primary objective of the Library Media Center is to implement, enrich, and support the educational program of the school. These ground rules provide the foundation for applying the criteria for selecting, acquiring, maintaining, and removing books from these school libraries and media centers. And these ground rules undergird the Florida Department of Education mandatory annual training for school media specialists concerning what books are appropriate for a grade level or age group. Turning to that recent settlement that Ms. Siegel brought up and argued that, the district staff attorney will surely argue that a recent agreement resulting in the dismissal of a court case brought by activists against the state has changed the landscape for library book challenges. She would be wrong on at least 2 counts. One, as I mentioned earlier, library books are not considered instruction and are accepted from the settlement, as is Florida Statute 1006.28 in its entirety, which does cover the criteria for selecting, curating, reviewing, retaining, and removing library books, plus handling parent objections. And 2, the Assistant Attorney General argued in Parnell, library books are government speech for its educational message to support the standard curriculum and are not a free speech zone for activist indoctrination. In my previous 3 elementary school book objections, I have heavily focused on the mandatory media specialist training, which I have completed. The training is part of my evidence, and the hearing officer is requested to review it again in light of this presentation. Here I offer a much abbreviated version of that training and explain the library book criteria in Florida Statute 1006.28 and its related statutes. On slide 6, library materials and materials on a reading list must meet several statutory requirements. They are 1, be free of pornography, 2, materials must be suited to student needs and their ability to comprehend the material presented, and 3, materials must be appropriate for the grade level and age group for which the materials are used and made available. Criteria 2 and 3, as listed on slide 6, referred to in the statute, must be suited to student needs and their ability to comprehend the material. Media specialists should also consider, at a minimum, the age, maturity level, and grade level of students with access to the material. In doing so, media specialists should consider factors such as the degree to which the material will be supplemented or explained by classroom instruction, the educational purpose of the material, with priority given to materials aligned to state standards, as well as the accurate portrayal of the state's broad racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, and cultural diversity without bias or indoctrination. Media specialists should also consider student interests and the needs of their specific school population when choosing materials. Slide 13. The school board should adopt procedures for developing library media collections. These should include that the selection meets the above-mentioned statute, there should be consultation of reputable, professionally recognized periodicals, the Library Media Center's selection should be based on reader interest, support of the state standards taking into consideration the ground rules, which I laid out in the previous slides, and curriculum and the academic needs of students and faculty. 4, the regular removal of books based on physical condition, rate of circulation, alignment to state standards, and relevancy to curriculum. So let's turn to the current text, My Maddy. This book is designated for grades K to 2. Let me read the first page. Most mommies are girls, most daddies are boys, but lots of parents are neither a boy nor a girl, like my Maddy. According to the statutes, it shall be the policy of every public educational institute that a person's sex is an immutable biological trait and it's false to ascribe to a person a pronoun that does not correspond to such a person's sex. Sex means the classification of a person as either female or male. These reproductive roles are binary, stable, and unchangeable. Thus, this does not align with the criteria in the state statutes. Children are not mature enough for this book in the K-2 environment, or even K-5. Again, state materials must be suited to student needs and their ability to comprehend the material. They must take into consideration age, maturity level, and grade level. Research on young children's abstract concept comprehension suggests that even precocious upper elementary readers may find it challenging to grasp the idea of a parent being neither male nor female. Similarly, younger readers, especially boys who are just starting to understand basic reading skills, may struggle with the concept of someone appearing as one sex but being another. Adult guidance is necessary in these situations, but it's important to discern whether the purpose is educational or ideological indoctrination. Turning to the peer reviews, Exhibit 5, in the peer review from Mackin, it clearly states that lots of parents are neither a boy nor a girl, and this book includes transgender and gender non-binary ideas. A peer review, Exhibit 5, from Kirkus Review, indicates that the adult-oriented back matter and the family-oriented picture books points that this should be an adult-directed text. However, those 2 peer reviews indicate that this book would be best used as an adult-directed text. Numerous resources in the back of the book indicate that this book is targeting adults to use in an adult-directed context with children. However, the statutes prohibit any adult-directed instruction of gender identity in K-8. Students would only have personal self-selected access to review this text. This text, therefore, is inappropriate for the K-5 school library. Also, in the training, in a slide that I had to remove in question of time, Media specialists are encouraged to look at books that have been removed from other school districts around the state of Florida. A very similar book to My Maddy, called When Aiden Became a Brother, was removed from 2 different school districts in the state of Florida, from Manatee and Escambia. Thus, this should have been taken into consideration when reviewing this book, and it definitely points to its unsuitability. Lastly, criteria for library material removal. One thing that should be taken into consideration is the recent circulation. From the time this book's been purchased till now, which I'm assuming is probably going to be 4 or 5 years like the previous books, it's only been circulated 6 times. This would indicate both low interest of readers, and also the low rate of recent circulation should indicate that it should be removed in place of a book that's higher in demand. Let me summarize my evaluation of My Maddy according to the state ground rules and statutory criteria. Each district school board shall adopt procedures for developing library media center collections, and the procedures must A, require that the book selections meet the criteria in 1006.40. Any materials purchased must be, 1, free of pornography and material prohibited under 847. This book is free of pornography and other prohibited material, so based on that standard, it would be ranked as appropriate. 2, suited to student needs and their ability to comprehend the material. This book is not suited to the student needs and ability to comprehend the material present for all the reasons I just went over. 3, appropriate for the grade level and age group for which the materials are used or made available. This book is not appropriate for the grade level and age group. Biological sex isn't even taught until 5th or maybe it's even 6th grade. It wasn't quite clear in the statutes. Thus, it does not align with the grade level instruction and would not be supplementary to it. Require consultation of reputable, professionally recognized review and periodicals and school community stakeholders. The peer reviews indicate that this book should be adult-directed. Thus, it's not suited to the student needs and their ability to comprehend the material. Everyone seems to agree that this is a book that should be engaged between an adult and a child. However, the school context is a prohibited context for that type of engagement. Thus, it should not be in the school library. Put it in the public library, put it on Amazon, and let the parents who want to read it to their kids go purchase it there. Based on reader interest, support of state academic standards, and aligned curriculum, and the academic needs of student and faculty. So based on this procedure, the circulation data suggests that there's minimal reader interest, pointing to its inappropriateness. The content is in direct opposition to numerous state standards, curriculum, and other state statutes. And the standards that perhaps it could be supported by saying, perhaps looking at literacy or decoding, or perhaps you want to talk about being character development, could be supported with a different text that doesn't contradict other state statutes. Lastly, providing for the regular removal or discontinuance of books based on, at a minimum, rate of recent circulation, alignment to state academic standards, and relevancy to curriculum. Again, on 3 of these measures, it points to its inappropriateness. The circulation data suggests minimal reader interest, content is in direct opposition to numerous state standards and curriculum, and the standards that it may support could again be better supported with a different text that is not in direct contradiction to other standards. Taking these evaluations together and applying the numerous guidelines and the criteria specified by the state statutes, this text fails to meet the threshold of appropriateness for the K-5 environment. Let me recommend in its place one of the sample titles that's provided in the Florida Best Standards. This list of texts should serve as a guide for teachers, curriculum developers, and test makers as they prepare their instructional units and material for Florida students. It should serve as a foundation for educators. However, of the 159 recommended titles for the K-5 environment, Terwilliger currently only has 31% of those titles in his current collection. The question is why? Why are we fighting so much for this book that obviously is problematic and points to violation of many state standards and is poorly circulated? Why are we not replacing it with one of these other 100 titles that are recommended by the state? Is there a bias here? And with that, I conclude my statement.
Excuse me, we're not to have any clapping of support. Respondent,
I have no questions for this witness.
thank you. Dr. Moreau, your next witness, please.
I'm sorry, whose turn is it to call witnesses?
Yes, your
Is it
next.
still my turn?
Yes.
Since the only witness I requested was not proffered, I would like to use my time for cross-examination of the Ms. Siegel's witnesses.
You rest.
She actually did list one of my witnesses as her witness. Am I to assume that you do not wish to call Ms. Duval?
I'll call Ms. Duval. Sorry, thank you for that opportunity. Yeah. I just need a minute. Where's the questions I handed you?
You may proceed, Ms. Dr. Moreau.
Thank you for coming. I just want to hand you what I'm going to refer to as from my slides.
Good thing I
It's
brought my
appropriate.
glasses.
Dr. Jackson, it's
Thank you.
appropriate when you're dealing with a witness and opposing counsel I would like a copy of the piece of paper, please. I cannot, unfortunately, with my eyesight.
Can I have a minute
Those
and
don't
open my
help.
computer up and find it on my computer so she can have my copy? Can I have a minute? Pause.
What was your question?
I would like to see what she's handing the witness. It's appropriate protocol to do that in a classic courtroom, even at an
Yeah,
informal
it's
one.
okay. There you go. You have it. And this
Do
is
I
not a
have a
classic
cop-
courtroom.
Do I have a copy? This is mine to keep.
Thank you. I guess you're supposed to give your name and position for the record.
My name is Patty Duval, and I am the district media specialist.
Do you know when this book was acquired?
June of 2021.
Someone? Okay, so looking at the statute, Florida Statute 1006.28, parenthesis 2, parenthesis D 2, it states, each district school board shall adopt procedures for developing library media center collections and post the procedures on the website for each school within the district. The procedure must, A, require that the book selection meets the criteria in Statute 1006.40, sub parentheses, and any materials pursuant to this section must be, 1, free of pornography and material prohibited under sections 847.012. According to your interpretation of this statute, is this book free of pornography and material prohibited under S 847.012?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Under the statute, it needs to be suited to the student needs and their ability to comprehend the material presented. Do you believe that this book is suited to student needs and their ability to comprehend the material presented?
Based on the information presented from the peer review journals that we rely on to select library materials, it indicated that it was appropriate for that age group.
Looking at peer reviews comes from a different statute, but from your professional opinion, do you believe that this book is suited to student needs and their ability to comprehend the material present?
My professional opinion is based on the information that I've gathered from the peer review journal articles that support this book, so yes.
Okay, so those who review, the peer reviewers, Are they familiar with the criteria and statutes of Florida when they review these books?
No,
No. So it's possible that they're not applying the criteria that you need to be applying, correct?
when we're looking at the age group that it's appropriate for, then the state criteria doesn't necessarily apply. I mean, it's not specific to just Florida that this book is appropriate for this age group.
Is it possible for a peer review to have a positive review of a book, but according to your professional opinion and guidance from the Florida Department of Education, you would deem it not appropriate?
Possibly?
But this one, you don't feel that way?
No.
You believe this book is appropriate? Do you think a child can read this book independently in the K-5 or K-2, which is indicated for, and understand it on their own?
Some of them.
You think a first grader or second grader can not only read and decode that book, but can understand the difference between a mommy, daddy, and someone who's neither?
That's really not up to me to decide. So that really has, that's not part of what I use to select this book.
So how do you understand the statute where it says it must be suited to the student needs and their ability to comprehend? How do you evaluate if it's their ability?
Based on the peer review articles.
I feel like we just went in a circle.
We kind of did.
Yeah.
But we rely on those peer review journals to support the selection criteria.
Right, but those, as we established, those peer reviewers are not following the selection criteria of Florida.
They don't have to follow the selection criteria. They just provide information based on, on their review of the material. And then we rely on their review of the material as opposed to having to read all the books ourselves.
Do you have to rely on the criteria set forth in the state of Florida statutes?
Yes.
Okay, so the statute says their ability to comprehend the material. So the reviewers aside, because they're not following the state statutes, it's up to you to follow the Florida state statutes to determine their ability to comprehend the material. Do you think, professionally as a representative of the state of Florida, that this meets the student's ability for them to comprehend it?
Yes.
All right. The next one, appropriate for the grade level and age group from which the materials are used or made. On what basis are you determining that it is? Let me rephrase it. Based on the statute that says appropriate for the grade level and age group for which the materials are used or made available, do you think that this book is appropriate?
Yes.
Based on what?
Peer review results.
Are you taking into consideration the grade level curriculum in the state of Florida and the requirements for the curriculum?
When library materials are selected, the curriculum is not in the forefront of our decisions.
So let me just jump to C then. Based on reader interest, support of state academic standards and aligned to curriculum and the academic needs of students and faculty, it looks like it should be at the forefront of your considerations. So do you disagree with that statute, or how are you interpreting that?
So it's not whether I agree or disagree, but if you look at, even if you look at the training that we were provided, and it said that the selection criteria is A, B, and C. And then it says that you should consider, right, priority should be given to materials aligned to state standards. That doesn't mean that everything must align to state standards.
Okay, I actually agree with you on that, but I think you need to have a stronger argument than to justify having it, and that would be based on age appropriateness. And
Dr.
Are you-
She's testifying, not just asking questions.
All right.
She should limit her statements to questions to the witness, not further testimony.
Ms. Siegel, I appreciate the feedback. I'm learning a lot on how to manage these legal situations. I am not a professional, but I'm trying. Thank you for the feedback. So when you do take into consideration support of state academic standards and aligned curriculum, does this text support state academic standards and aligned curriculum?
No,
Okay. So that would be an indication that it wouldn't be appropriate on that standard, on that criteria.
it's not a criteria. Supporting state standards is not a criteria for selecting library books. The criteria for selecting library books is defined in 1006.403D.
The procedures must, so each district, the procedures must be based on reader interest, supportive state academic curriculum, academic standards and aligned curriculum.
Right.
So it is a consideration that you should take into account when selecting the text, correct?
So it says the procedures must provide for a collection that. Your document doesn't really state the entire wording of the statute, but the statute says that the procedure, that the school board must provide for collections that.
For your reference, the entire text, it's at the header, has that lead in, and then it's bullet point by bullet point, so it is
So
there.
the overall collection must have books that support reader interest. It must have books that meet state standards. It must have books that support the curriculum. But every book in the library does not have to meet all three pieces of that criteria. There are books in this collection that do meet the criteria. There are books in the collection at Terwilliger that do support state standards, that do align with the curriculum, and there are books in the library that support reader interest, not necessarily all three together.
Well, it sounds like you're ignoring the training on slides 11 and 31.
Dr. Marule, you're being argumentative.
Sorry,
Please
let me rephrase
question.
that. Okay. So in evaluating bullet points 2 and 3, the appropriateness, right, the suited to student needs and the appropriateness, the training says media specialists should consider factors such as the degree to which the material will be supplemented or explained by classroom instruction. This is talking about selection criteria.
It is things that we should consider. That doesn't mean we have to consider them for every single book that we buy.
Where do you get that wording or reference from?
Well, should. I should weigh less and eat less, but I don't.
Okay. So taken into that factor, the degree to which the material would be supplemented or explained by classroom instruction, to what degree would this text?
It wouldn't, and
Supplemented.
it's not considered when we select library materials because we don't buy them to be used in the classroom.
Dr. Marule, it has been asked and
I'll
answered.
move on.
Move on to another question, please.
Okay, so then the bullet point D, provide for the regular removal or discontinuance of books based on, at a minimum, physical condition, a rate of recent circulation, alignment to state academic standards, and relevancy to curriculum, et cetera.
Right.
As I pointed out, the circulation data is nominal.
Correct?
So is this book being proposed for removal based on that rate of recent circulation?
So that's an interesting question. So in general, there are no specific guidelines that say if this book has not been checked out in 5 years, it has to be removed. Best practices would be to look at, has it been circulated in the last 3 to 5 years? And then we would look at, do we want to make effort to promote this book so that people will check it out? Or is it something that isn't of interest that we need to remove? I agree with that. In this particular case, so as far as determining the circulation history of books, we moved to a new system in the 1920 school year. So all of the circulation data was gone, and so we only have circulation data that goes back to the 1920 school year. That being said, at the end of the 1920 school year and all of the 2021 school year, our circulation data is really irrelevant because it wasn't a time for normal circulation due to COVID. So we can't really remove a book because it wasn't circulated during that time frame because the book hasn't had enough of an opportunity to,
I
for the
understand.
students to get that.
If the trend
So-
continues of low circulation,
Sure, absolutely, if it continues for low circulation. But in Terwilliger's case, it's really interesting because they got 6,000 new books at one time in the 21-22 school year. So it's going to be a while before, and there's probably 50% of those books that haven't circulated yet. We're not going to get rid of 3,000 books because they haven't circulated, but because they all came at once, so we have to give them an adequate amount of time. Not all of them are going to get checked out in the next year or 2 years. So it is something to consider, but in the case of a new collection where everything comes at once, it's really kind of hard to apply that, well, if it hasn't been checked out in 3 years, we need to remove it. So, but it will be considered, certainly. It will be a factor that's considered.
do you think this text is more appropriate for adult-directed engagements?
I don't disagree with that.
And can any adult legally engage with this text in the school environment? with a
No.
student? So wouldn't it be better in a different environment?
I'm not going to disagree with that,
Thank you.
but I am going to say that it still does meet the selection criteria for the state of Florida.
Is the adult in my Maddie a boy or a girl?
It doesn't say.
Could the adult in my Maddie be anything other than a boy or a girl?
I don't know. I didn't write the book.
If a child were to ask you what pronoun to use for my Maddie, what would you tell them?
It's misleading, irrelevant.
How?
The book, we're just discussing the book, not an opinion.
Do you agree that it's false to use a pronoun that doesn't correspond to someone's biological
It
sex?
really has nothing to do with the hearing today as far as whether this book meets selection criteria, so I really don't have an answer for that question.
As an educator, do you follow the Florida law that a person's gender relates to their biology?
I'm sorry, but that really doesn't apply to to the hearing today as far as I'm
That's no
concerned, and I don't think I need to answer that
foundation
question.
basis, Dr. Muir.
Thanks. Do you agree that you have the duty to fully and faithfully comply with state laws, standards, and rules?
This book meets the selection criteria. I am a sworn educator for the state of Florida. That should answer your question.
I would like a yes or no.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Do you have any questions? Please.
Mrs. Duval, you're supposed to stay up there because it's my turn to ask you questions. That's okay. Okay, Ms. Duval, I'm just going to ask a few things. I just want to correct a couple things. I think at some point, if I was hearing correctly, you said 1920 to 2020. I think you meant 2020, didn't you?
1920 to 2021.
It's tough to change from the 19s to the 20s sometimes.
Yeah, I was talking about the school years. Correct.
Well, she said 19, well, okay, that's fine. Thank you, but you all don't need to be helping us out here, but that's okay. How long have you been employed by the School Board of Alachua County?
17 years.
And before you became the district media specialist, what did you do for us?
But I was the elementary library media specialist at Newberry Elementary. I served as a project manager for a Title I laptop project, and I was also an instructional technology coach.
Okay. So you are familiar with the standards for running an elementary school, public school library, correct? Is that a yes?
Yes.
You have to talk out loud because the court reporter can't take down a nod. When a child that is kindergarten to second grade comes into the library, can they go around and pick up any book they want to pick up to read?
Generally, no.
What is the general practice in the Alachua County schools for helping children that are K to 2 in selection of what books to read?
So we refer to them as our little people, And we guide them towards the easy section of the library where, where there's easy readers and beginning readers and picture books, things that are appropriate for their age group.
Okay. And if a parent of any of the students in the library did not want their child to read a certain book, is that possible?
Yes.
What happened? How does that come about?
So a parent can limit their child's access to the school library by submitting, there is a form on the district website that allows them to provide information as to how they would like their children's access limited. And we base that limitation on information provided from the MARC records. So for example, if a parent doesn't want their child to read a book about dinosaurs, for example, then, we would make sure that when they bring the book up, that it is, appropriate for what the parents are looking for. We base that on information provided from the MARC record. We can't really determine every single word in every single book. However, if a parent can give us a guideline as to topics or genres or authors that they don't want their children to read.
So if a parent such as Dr. Marule or any other parent of a elementary school child did not want their child to read My Maddy, would that be possible upon the parent's request?
Sure, they could either request that the parent, specifically that title, or that they don't want anything to do with gender or, those kinds of things. However they want to limit what their child's access is, we do our best to accommodate that.
You are familiar with the procedures for handling book challenges this year, are you
Just
not?
a little, yes, ma'am.
What are your responsibilities with respect to book challenges?
So my responsibility is at the district level. If a challenge comes in, I coordinate the district level meeting. I gather the materials needed for the review. I, gather all the committee members. And then at the district level review, I, present information to the committee, providing them with what the parents' objections are, what the statutes are regarding library selection, and then as a committee, they each make their own determination, and then we have a discussion, and then every member votes, including myself. I am a voting member at the district level.
Now, this book was also reviewed at the school level.
It was,
Because it came in prior to the time we changed the procedure.
right,
Were you responsible for that?
yes, right.
How so?
So at the school level review, I wasn't responsible for gathering the committee. That was something that this handled at the school level. My responsibility is to come to the meeting, present the information to the committee, including what the objection is, what the statutory requirements are for library selection, and then kind of guide the discussion, but I don't really participate in it at the school level. And then I do not vote at the school level.
So you're kind of a facilitator.
Correct.
Of the process. Was that process gone through with respect to My Maddy?
Yes.
And what were the opinions of the school level advisory committee regarding this text?
I believe that it was a unanimous vote that this book should remain on the shelf, that it did meet the selection criteria established by the state of Florida as I presented, and so they voted to keep the book on the shelf.
And then at the request of Dr. Marule, the challenge was elevated to the district level,
Yes.
correct? And were you, as you told us before, you were on that committee?
Yes, ma'am.
As was Mr. Rame, who's sitting over here?
Yes.
And Mr. Berry?
Correct.
And a couple of others? Okay.
Correct.
What was the consensus, if there was a consensus, what was the consensus of the district level review committee?
Again, that the book was appropriate for the school library based on the selection criteria, and that it should remain on the shelf.
And was that a unanimous vote?
I don't remember, but I think so.
Okay. I think this has already gone over, so I'm not going to repeat what you talked to on direct. Do you have an opinion, based on your years of being both a media specialist in elementary level and district specialist, do you have an opinion as to whether the material in this book was suited for a student K through 3 or K through 2 level ability to comprehend the material in the book?
I do.
And what is that opinion?
Well, I believe that it is appropriate.
Do you have an opinion as to whether the material is appropriate for the grade level and the age group for which it is used?
I do.
And what is that opinion?
I agree that it's appropriate.
The book is not used for instructional purposes.
Correct?
It's not on a recommended reading list.
Correct?
It's available in the library for a student to check it out if the parent does not object, correct?
Yes. Correct.
There was mentioned a Parnell case when Dr. Murrow was asking you questions. Do you agree with what is stated by the Florida Department of Education and the Florida Board in the Parnell case that any library book that encourages children to read voluntarily is supplemental in their education because reading is required in all subject areas?
Yes, I do.
And you agree with that?
Yes.
And finally, do you agree with the statement by, the board, that reading is not confined to the curricular material in any given classroom course?
I agree.
Thank you, ma'am. I have nothing further.
Now wait, you have questions?
No.
No.
No,
No. Okay.
you're Ms. Siegel, we had that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
All right. Ms. Siegel, you have next witness?
Just so we don't go off track, Dr. Murrow, you also listed any witness that's on our witness list. Am I to assume that you do not wish to call Dr. Rame or Mr. Berry?
I'll just save my time for cross-examining since I'm running out of time.
Okay. Then I will call first Dr. Rame. I was just going to ask you if your mic was on when my mic was not on. Would you tell the folks here what your name is and how you're employed?
My name is Dr. John Rame. I am the Social Studies Curriculum Specialist, K through 12 for Alachua County Public Schools.
How long have you been with the Alachua County Public Schools?
I've been with Alachua County Public Schools for 8 years.
And what jobs have you had in the school district?
I've held this position for the last 5.5 years, and 3 years before that, I was a teacher at Eastside High School.
And what did you teach at Eastside?
I taught AP and IB Psychology and AP US History.
Okay. And briefly, your educational background, starting with undergraduate school.
I have a bachelor's degree in Psychology and Philosophy from the University of Miami, a bachelor's degree in History from Florida International University, a Master's of Science in Social Studies Education from Florida International University, a educational specialist from Florida International University in curriculum and instruction with an emphasis on social studies education, and an educational doctoral degree in curriculum instruction with an emphasis on social studies education, specifically the history of social studies education.
I want you to assume for purposes of this question that the parent, Dr. Murrow, who objected to this book, stated as one of the reasons for her objection was that the book is based on a theory of gender identity that is not widely accepted in the general community, nor is it scientifically based. This is the same objection she had a previous book we talked about. Do you have an opinion, or do you agree with that statement?
I do not agree with that statement.
Why not?
While I am not an expert, my background in psychology and as a member of the American Psychological Association, I know enough about the history of at least something like non-binary to know that it has been in the vernacular of the scientific community in psychology since at least the 1970s. And I received recently, the end of last month, I brought it with me here, a copy of their policy statement affirming that non-binary is an appropriate gender.
It's widely accepted in the psychological literature.
Yes.
One of her other objections was that excluding any information about actual biological sex and only discussing gender identity according to the controversial theories is not age appropriate for elementary school children to understand. Again, do you agree with that statement that she made in her objection?
I don't, and the American Psychological Association doesn't agree either. They do believe that gender between children, adolescents, and adults is something that is not binary, and that it is able to be discussed and understood.
Do you have an opinion as to whether the statements in this book are controversial?
No, I think it handles gender in as kid gloves a manner as possible.
And then there was another statement that there are no long-term studies showing the effects of destabilizing one of the most fundamental biological categories amongst young children. That was one of Dr. Marul's objections. Do you have an opinion, or do you agree with that objection?
I find that particular statement has a few issues that are problematic. Saying that it's a fundamental biological bifurcation of male and female does not coincide with, historically speaking and philosophically speaking, the totality of human history. I mean, as far back as ancient Egypt, they've talked about intersex individuals. Mesopotamia has intersex individuals. So, I mean, to say that it's a fundamental categorization isn't correct. That really is a Western ideology that is more recent, that there is such a thing as just two sexes. Almost every other culture on the planet has at least three sexes.
Are you familiar with the concept of a person being non-binary?
Yes.
What does that mean?
So non-binary would mean that that individual does not necessarily see themselves inherently as being in either of the two male or female traditional Western categories.
Is being non-binary considered having a mental illness?
No, it is not. It is not in the DSM-5 or the ICD. I believe it's 14 now.
Are you aware of any evidence that would suggest that the incident of children being classified as non-binary has arisen because of reading books like My Maddy?
No, I'm not.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, I'll try to make it quick. Well, although your educational background is impressive, I don't actually see any biology focus in any of your background. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And the last time you actually did psychology was as a bachelor's degree, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, I had a bio major, so my opinion is probably equally valid as yours. I have just as much degrees as you do.
Dr. Jackson, again, she's testifying.
All right, sorry.
She's not asking questions.
You're right, my bad. My question
I
for
will
you-
say, ma'am, I did teach a college level course on introductory to psychology, so I do feel that I can at least speak as far as that. I cannot say I claim to speak any further than that.
Are you familiar with Richard Dawkins?
I know the name, but I have not read anything.
You know the name, you know he's one of the most esteemed biologists in the world, right? Or-
I'm a psychologist.
I know, but he's a biologist.
Yes, ma'am,
Dr.
I
Muro,
understand.
question, please.
Okay, are you aware that he said this week sex is binary, male and female? And he's a biologist.
As somebody who studies psychology, psychology does differentiate between gender and sex.
Are you
And
sharing?
there are also individuals that are intersex, so
And they're 0.02% of the population. And is it not true that even an intersex individual will either develop tissue that will provide for the small gamete production or the large gamete
Dr.
production?
Muro,
I'm not a biologist, so I do not know that.
Correct.
Dr. Rim, question.
Okay. Are you sharing, all these opinions that you're sharing about non-binary, three sexes, is this your personal opinion or is this your professional opinion as a state employee?
It is based upon research, so it's not an opinion.
Okay, but are you testifying in the role as an independent individual, personal life, or are you testifying as an employee of the state of Florida?
I'm an employee of the state of Florida.
Okay, are you familiar with the statute that says it shall be the policy of every public K-12 educational institution that is provided or authorized by the Constitution and laws of Florida that a person's sex is an immutable biological trait and that it is false to ascribe to a person a pronoun that does not correspond to such a person's sex?
I have not done that.
I thought you just spent 10 minutes doing that.
I have not said any pronouns whatsoever that have not connected to somebody's specific sex.
Okay, do you think a mom can produce a sperm?
Mom is a word that somebody calls a parent. Therefore, if my daughter decided to call me mom, then yes, that could be the case.
So how do you define mom?
Mom is a word that a child calls a parent.
How is it different from dad?
Dad is a word that a child calls a parent. Usually those words do have relationship to specific genders.
Genders or sex?
Genders.
How do you define gender?
Well, gender can be defined in a number of different ways, but in general, and again, historically speaking, there have been lots of different genders. I mean, we can look in all across the world that says there are multiple genders out there that aren't just two. So if you want my specific opinion on how to define gender,
Could you give me a quick definition? I'm running out of time. Like a 10-second definition?
I have to think, I apologize.
Okay. If you can't provide a 10-second definition of gender, but you think a child in K-2 can read a book that's conflating gender and sex and they can understand it on their own, how do you justify that opinion?
That's an
That's-
improper question.
I can't answer that.
Absolutely.
I do not believe that the book is conflating those two things.
Dr. Rim,
I've objected, Dr. Rame, and I would suggest that, excuse me, sir. Excuse me, sir.
you're not a petitioner, sir. You're a
I'm allowed to
accompanist.
have counsel or qualified assistance.
Is he practicing law today?
It says counsel or qualified assistant.
I'm a qualified assistant. Simple.
We have not sworn,
You-
no. We want to continue with this, but please, Dr. Murrow, continue with your petition.
Let me try to rephrase that. You purport that this book is introducing gender separate from sex, and that a K-2 child could understand that, but yet you can't give me a 10-second definition of what gender is, but you think a child K-2 could.
I don't.
Dr. Murrow, you've asked, and he's answered that, please. And I'm going to clear this
He
hearing.
didn't answer
I
it.
don't want response from the audience.
Okay, he didn't answer it.
He said he had no answer for you. That's an answer.
You can't answer. Good.
All right, I rest.
Thank you. You may be. Dr. Attorney C. Okay. All right. So that concludes. Thank you. All right, we have now at the closing statements, and how many minutes does Dr. Muir have? 13. Dr. Muir, you have 13 minutes. And the witnesses, you may be excused for your meeting.
Okay. I just want to thank everybody for attending today, especially the witnesses. Mr. Berry, you keep getting left out. I'm so sorry. I'm going to call you next time. I'm sure you're lamenting the fact that you weren't called. Okay. So here are my closing statements. Last fall, when I questioned why a book containing pornographic material would be in my son's school at the library at GHS, I knew that exposing children, especially young men, to this kind of literature was harmful to their development and arguably harmful to their relationships and our greater society as a whole. I also knew that smartphones weren't helping this issue at all. But what I didn't know was that books of this genre were intentionally in his school library. I didn't know that there was an activist agenda to seed our school libraries at all levels with books intended to prematurely sexualize children and introduce them to concepts promoted by queer theory. I hardly knew what queer theory was. I now know it is a postmodern form of delusional thinking that a person's subjective reality, that is the way he or she thinks or feels, is supposed to be objectively real, the truth. I say delusional because objective reality is independent of how a person thinks or feels. While one's perception of objective reality may be a reality for them, it is not the reality that others necessarily experience. And it's delusional for someone to think that others should embrace their subjective reality as objective truth. Queer theory is driving gender fluidity, part of the gender ideology, the delusional thinking that one can be a girl today and a boy tomorrow, as expressed in the book Melissa, or the book It Feels Good to Be Yourself, and in this current book, My Maddy, that you have recommended our young children read. When a parent or district citizen requests a review of library material, that request should launch the district's rigorous review of the book's merits against the state statutes and the Florida Department of Education rules, nothing else. But what is currently happening is nothing short of a public bureaucratic struggle session orchestrated by the district power brokers and their activist allies, instead of turning to the Florida Department of Education for guidance, the district is implementing the, quote, "We Need Diverse Books," or the WNDB toolbox for opposing book challenges. Their strategy includes tactics like, 1, turning to the media to expose the book objector to undue pressure to dissuade them from persisting with their book challenge. 2, collaborating with activist groups to apply public and social pressure on the individual, canceling my professional and personal relationships. 3, complicating the book review process, changing procedures, and creating unnecessary protocols, all to exhaust and overwhelm the objector with bureaucracy. I have even seen district representatives go as far as to change the minutes of public meetings violating Florida sunshine laws, all in an attempt to silence the legitimate voices of stakeholders. 4, claiming a privileged understanding of Florida statutes while disregarding state-mandated training. And when these tactics fail, resorting to calling the parent a bigot, a racist, or worse. This behavior isn't just unethical, it's illegal for public employees. As public employees and representatives of the state, your response to my legitimate book challenges should be guided solely by Florida law, not an activist agenda. Your actions make it evident you are not interested in upholding our government's right to speak through school library books, which by your very position you are obliged to do. You prefer instead to circumvent these laws to sabotage the government's message, and there are consequences. In significant part, as a result of my naivety, I find myself in a maelstrom of words and politics I am virtually unfamiliar with. Trying to keep some healthy perspective and staying plugged into objective reality, I have had to decide whether to endure the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune for the higher good of our public school children and their families. And 3 realities have encouraged me to stay the course. First, I learned that my state government had recognized the insidious strategy of those promoting queer theory and gender ideology in our public schools and passed laws attempting to restrict spreading these concepts in both school instruction and library books intended to support that instruction. And these laws have established ground rules for public school policies concerning male, female, binary sex, and human reproduction, connecting gender to biology, which is an objective truth, and limiting the use of trans preferred pronouns with students and staff in our public schools. Second, I'm a psycholinguist, a language expert with 3 advanced degrees, and I am a professor. So when I was told by your school media specialist that I should leave this matter of book choices to the experts, I obtained the requisite mandatory instruction for media specialists that was part of these new laws. That training was very encouraging, and it showed me that my government was committed to opposing these delusional theories of sexual reality. Third, though I am told I am a crusader, a cultural warrior, my naive efforts have resulted in 3 realities, 1 negative and 1 positive and 1 political. Negatively, I now know personally what the woke cancel culture is like. I've been canceled both personally and professionally by many of who were supposed to be my friends and colleagues. When appropriate, I have pushed back and made complaints. There are real consequences for such hateful, bigoted, and racist behavior, and I believe I will ultimately be vindicated. Positively, I've experienced a groundswell of support from parents and citizens concerned about what's happening to their public schools. Churches and groups have enthusiastically embraced and supported me, though I do not formally represent any of them. People are willing to donate money for legal fees. Several people have volunteered to make book objections, and I'm encouraging them with what I have learned. If you won't apply the law to clean up our school libraries, we will. Also, politically well-connected individuals, including Senator Keith Perry, are sharing my story at the highest levels of our state government. I didn't ask for this attention or notoriety, and I'm not letting it deter me from the fidelity of my mission to remove the influence of delusional thinking fostered by queer theory from our school's library books. The most grievous disappointment in this saga is the willful ignorance or complicity of those who should have the best interests of our children in the forefront of their minds. My experiences with these book hearings has only confirmed that this WNDB cabal created by district staff who are complicit with activists promoting queer theory. The mantra of your school district is, quote, "We are committed to the success of every student," but you and they are turning a blind eye to the reality of the harmful effect of this kind of delusional sexual thinking. And to this, the social contagion of this new, quote, gender dysphoria, which is not historical psychological gender dysphoria at all, is harming the lives of many young people and is causing irreparable damage in the minds and bodies. But do you actually care? I'm here today, as I've been here, at the past 3 hearings to expose his ideological activism and to hold you responsible to the rule of law. It's precisely, again, those who believe they're above the law who pose the most significant threat to the democratic protection our laws are intended to give us. Your improper responses and toxic behaviors toward me over these books are tearing at the very fabric that is supposed to hold this community together. Parents are supposed to be able to trust their children in loco parentis to the care of their schools. But when it is revealed the trust that should govern their interaction with our children is being circumvented, even in one single regard, the foundation of that trust is compromised. If we cannot trust our educators with a relatively minor responsibility, such as selecting library materials according to the state laws, how are we to trust them with far more serious responsibilities? It is apparent you are not interested, even remotely, in determining if a particular text is age appropriate or within the child's ability to understand. Rather, your sole motivation is to preserve your unencumbered ability to influence the impressionable minds of our young children. As a mother and a caring person, I have chosen not to cancel myself from this conflict, but to double down with the growing support I'm receiving. Our goal is that Florida public schools can be trusted not to indoctrinate our children with ideologies that history has proven will destroy any civilization that undermines binary sexuality between a male and a female. The research is there, but you are ignoring it. The research is there that healthy families where masculinity and femininity are modeled for children result in healthy human communities. I have presented you with the state law again and again for the selection, retention, and removal of library books. I have presented you with the legal authorities argued by our state attorney general in the Parnell case, showing that library books represent government speech in our schools. I have shown you that our public school libraries are not a forum for free speech by any queer theory ideologue, and I have shown that the settlement between our state government and the LGBTQ advocates does not cover library books or section 1006.28, the controlling statutory criteria for library books. The school district and the school board have a choice, whether to order themselves under the duly enacted laws and rules governing the books that may populate our school libraries, or to continue to be lackeys of a small, vocal group of queer theory activists. And though it will be much cheaper to remedy this situation locally, you want to allow this controversy to flourish into a series of Florida Department of Education magistrate hearings and or court cases at a great expense to your taxpaying constituents. May I observe, I think you very much dislike me because I represent accountability. But know this, I and many others are not going away. We will continue to shine our disinfecting light into the workings of the district for as long as it takes. Personally, I am far more afraid of your arrogant, elitist, tyrannical tendencies than I am of anything you can do to my reputation. For what is clear from the biblical story of Jonah, as summarized by the internationally acclaimed clinical psychologist Jordan Peterson, quote, "If you are called upon by conscience and opportunity to take a particular course of action and you don't do it, you will end up in hell, either one of eternal suffering or one of suffering that feels eternal while it's happening. And if that's not real enough for you, what about the hell of totalitarian states? We know that lying, sins of omission, sins of commission, lying in particular leads to that kind of hell. And that's what you should be afraid of. And that is real. As George Orwell presciently warned, all tyrannies rule through fraud and force, but once the fraud is exposed, they must rely exclusively on force. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer accurately warned that, quote, silence in the face of evil is evil, and I will not be silent.
Attorney Siegel?
Yes, ma'am. Apparently, Dr. Murrow misunderstood my reference to the settlement agreement. The statement of the state of Florida is that it is okay now to discuss sexual orientation or gender identity in a classroom setting, as long as you are not instructing on it. And if that is acceptable, it is acceptable to have a book in the school library that deals with those issues. If it is the statement of the state of Florida that it is okay for a teacher to respond to a child K through 2 asking a question about their identity or family life, which may not be traditional in the sense of male-female, and if that's the stance of the state of Florida, then it certainly is okay to have a book in the library that deals with a non-traditional family. If the state of Florida tells us Within the last 2 weeks, this came out, that references in literature to gender issues or references to moms and dads in whatever combination thereof is acceptable in classroom instruction, then it's okay to have a library book on those issues that is not an instructional text. And finally, if it would violate the statute to instruct students that gender identity is immutable based on biological traits, the state has told us that now, despite what the statute may say. It does not violate the law to have a book in the library that deals with non-conforming gender identity. Library books are not classroom instructions and therefore can cover items that are not taught. Dr. Marule complains that we are all activists that are teaming up against her for some nefarious purpose. As I said at the first hearing we have, Dr. Marule herself is an activist. Her activism is just on a different topic or a different viewpoint than the activism, if it is such, of the rest of us or the many people in this community that accept and want books to be able to be read, number one. Number two, nobody in the district started the group called Freedom to Read. That was a separate group that was organized. They have contacted us, but we did not start them. The other thing that I hear over and over and over again that is just incorrect is that having a book like My Maddy in the library is going to indoctrinate children. No one is indoctrinated unless something is taught over and over and over and over again and told that it is the right way to go. And according to the state now, it is not right to say that the only proper relationships are heterosexual, just as it's the policy of the state not to say it's right that the only acceptable relationships are non-heterosexual. So I would ask that this book be retained and on the school library. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a copy for you. I would like to enter into the record my opening and closing comments. I would still like to enter them.
We want it in the record, ma'am.
Sir, it is in the record if it's on the court reported transcript, but you don't want a copy of them? No, I've got a transcript, but you know, I got it. No, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't.
All right, we've heard the closing statements, and we're at the end. Within a reasonable time from the date of this hearing, I will render a recommended order and will be submitted to the school board. Each party will receive a copy of my recommended order. The school board, at a regular business meeting, will consider the recommended order and enter a final order at a publicly noticed board meeting after taking public comment. Petitioner, Dr. Murrow, you have an opportunity to attend the school board meeting and speak on this item at the board meeting. If you have any objections to my recommendation, you have the right to submit objection to the school board prior to that meeting. Does either party have any questions?
No, ma'am.
What's your question? Oh, actually, just one question and one reminder. When you send the recommended order, is it possible to send it in a form that's easily convertible to Word so we can annotate it?
That recommended order is submitted to the board. And your addition should not interfere with, you have a separate rebuttal not to insert in my recommendation order. My recommended order to the board goes to them. My order is not to be revised,
I want to annotate it with
inserted.
my comments.
Excuse me?
But I wanted to annotate it with my comments.
You submit your own rebuttal to the school board, not to add into my recommended order. Two separate documents.
My other question or reminders, could you please send us written all those
I would send it
procedures?
through the staff attorney's office, and they will
The
submit
ones that you opened with?
the procedure, yes.
Thank you.
Are there any questions? This meeting is adjourned.